Good morning and welcome to this session on the Mental Health Challenge, how to effectively manage psychological disability. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Martin Paquette and James Wendland from Make It Safe Platinum sponsor TextMed Services Inc. Martin is the Vice President of Innovation and is instrumental in the development of the innovative solutions that allow TextMed's clients to remain at the forefront of disability management. James is the Technical Claims Manager at TextMed, where he oversees complex claims, client education on WorkSafe BC and Workers' Compensation Board issues nationwide, appeals of claims, and mentorship development of staff. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Dale.
James.
Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to be here. First and foremost, I want to gratefully acknowledge that we here at our head office are gathered on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Chilkoot people. So thank you so much for everyone for bringing us here, for giving us this opportunity to speak, for the MSABC for bringing people from all around the world during this conference to share phenomenal insights and educate on topics that really make all of our lives safer and better. So I'll share my screen here so everybody can see our presentation. James, we're good?
We're good.
Fantastic. So a little bit about TextMed and who we are as an organization. So today we're presenting you the Mental Health Challenge. So how to effectively manage psychological disability. So get us started, a little bit about TextMed. So TextMed, we are proudly Canadian. We are a organization that's been doing disability management for over 25 years. So actually in a year and a half, we'll be at the 30-year mark. So really excited about that. We've been honored to be awarded Reader's Choice for Best Disability Management Company. And really what we do is we work with organizations and Canadian employers from all across Canada, all shapes and sizes, from 15 employees to 20,000 employees. And really at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is taking care of their employees, looking at everything under the umbrella of return to work and having employees stay at work, healthy and productive employees. So really, really excited about what we're going to be talking about today. So first and foremost, a little bit about our speakers, myself and James. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen for just a second here. James, let's do a quick intro here. So I'll start off. So my name is Martin Paquette. I'm the Vice President of Innovation and Growth here at TextMed. So I have extensive experience working with these employers I just mentioned, saving them money and looking at opportunities to help take care of their employees. My passion really comes down to individual well-being, psychological safety, and the idea that at the end of the day, we're all people working with other people to provide a service or a product to people and to take care of us and our people at the end of the day. And that's what's really important about this conversation we're having, because psychological health and safety, psychological claims, mental illness, mental well-being, all those are important aspects for all of us. I'll let James introduce himself.
Pleasure. So my name is James Wendland. I'm the Technical Claims Manager. So I sit in the background. I provide advice and guidance to the staff within the company. My background, disability management, started years ago. I've been a therapist for 23 years now. I've worked internally at WorkSafe. I've worked internally at ICBC. So familiar with all the laws and policies of the Workers' Compensation Act, and then also the Motor Vehicle Act, and how to navigate the systems for employers. So my role is really providing sort of quality care, quality education, and ensuring that the workers' rights under the Act are respected, as are the employers' rights under the Act respected, to find that healthy balance and just really help take care of the employees and get everyone back to work in a safe and efficient manner.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. So we've got the right people here to have this conversation. So I want to invite everyone to take some time to write on the side. I think it's at the bottom here, if I'm pointing in the right direction here. Go ahead and use the chat function. You can even put us full screen if you want to see my face bigger, but my presentation will be taking over the screen in a second. But write some questions as we go. Our lovely people at MSABC will transfer them over, and we'll try to answer your questions at the end if time permits. So going back to our PowerPoint here, let me make sure it works. James, we're back on. We're good.
We're all good, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you. So moving on to our agenda for today and what we're going to be talking about. So first of all, a quick introduction on mental health. Now, you've got the privilege of listening to some fantastic stories and presentations, really some really impactful, meaningful education that we've had during this MSABC and still to come after our presentation. But we'll talk about mental health, and that's going to be a topic throughout all of the presentations you see. Something that's important is understanding the attitudes towards stigma and towards mental illness and the importance of mental health and why employers should really prioritize it. Then we want to talk about how workers' compensation and mental health claims come into play, what to do with them, how to deal with them. And that's where James is going to come in and talk with his expertise. We're going to talk about bullying and harassment in the workplace, what that looks like, and how to make a positive impact at the end of the day when it comes to mental health claims. So general, I'll be trying to go through some of the slides fairly quickly. For those that joined me on October 14th in person, it was a privilege to present to all of you. But I'll be kind of going over some of the important topics of mental health. So first, to get us started, so what is mental health? So of course, we have the definition here on the Public Health Agency. But what's really important is that we understand that it comes down to how we feel, think, and act at the end of the day, is our capacity to do so, to enhance our ability to enjoy life, but also our ability to face challenges, our resilience around that. So mental health is an important aspect of that. So obviously, if a person is not experiencing that and they don't have positive mental health or they have mental illness, that can have a drastic effect on all aspects of their lives, work included, of course. So without mental health, we're really unable to adapt to the hardships, feel the emotional security, and really generally enjoy life. That's why it's so incredibly important. So I want to kind of talk about sort of a spectrum that was shared with Dr. Hilary Bennett, Francois Barton, and also Brent Gill that the other presentation presented, sort of a really good spectrum on mental well-being from unwell to thriving. And I kind of want to show a different perspective as well on what is mental illness and how it relates to mental health. So, if you think about a spectrum here where you have either minimal mental illness or maximum, if you will, mental illness. So somebody who has either multiple disorders or severe disorders as well. So we know that, somebody who would be, no mental illness at all would be on one side, while somebody else who may have multiple or severe mental illness would be on the other side. It is different, though, if we think about it, to how mental health operates. So mental health is like physical health. Somebody who can be healthy, taking care of themselves, eating well, doing exercise can be very healthy. And that actually affects their ability to, deal with health issues that may come. So if you think of mental illness, it could be like cardiovascular issues, diabetes, or other health issues. So those could be hereditary, could be passed down. So the same way that mental health works is that if we are able to build a mentally health workplace, we're helping our employees be able to cope and deal with mental illness in general. So if they are faced with it. So somebody who's unwell and doesn't take care of the mental health is likely to be able to become mentally ill. And then to the same point, if somebody's already mentally ill, but they have a strong mental health, then at the same time, they're able to actually protect themselves and they're able to feel that resilience in order to not be actually affected as much by their mental illness. So it's kind of showing you the difference between the two. So of course, in one corner, you see somebody who has a serious mental illness, but copes well with positive mental health, while somebody who all of us would wish to be in this category of no mental illness at all, no disorder, but a positive mental health. So that's fantastic. If something occurs drastic in their life, then of course they can usually deal with it. But then there are people that have serious mental illness and don't have the proper mental health to deal with it. Or those that have poor mental health and don't yet have a mental illness, but it may develop over time. Right? So all those things are important to understand that there is a distinction between mental health and what we can do in our lives to take care of our mental health, and mental illness, which we may be hereditary, genetic, or it could be affected by either burnout or other things that can happen in our lives. So going into what you as an employer and what your responsibilities are, right? So first of all, I want to kind of emphasize that the workplace is not a mental health center. So unless you work at a mental health center, but that's different. But in general, workplace is not you're not meant to be a therapist at the end of the day, but you are there to be able to show empathy and listen to your employees. So it's really important at the end of the day that most organizations understand they don't exist to help their employees recover from problems. They're there to help them with the challenges as well. So they're there to, with their ability to support the employees if they were to be impaired. So essentially, an employer has various motivations that would actually influence them to actually take care of their employees, of course, societal obligation, corporate values. But at the end of the day, it's a solid business case. The retention of talent, which is really important these days, as we all know, mitigating absenteeism and disability, and overall greater productivity, which turns into profitability for organization. So one thing that's really important for us to talk about is one of the greatest hurdles that we're facing with mental illness and mental health in general. It is really understanding the stigma around it, right? So the word stigma itself comes from the brand or the scar, the Greek word for branding or scarring someone or cut somebody in order for the bearer to be defined and to be labeled as either a slave or a criminal. So otherwise kind of ostracized from society. And that's the problem with the idea of stigma, is that there's steps that are happening with individuals when they're stigmatized, right? And we have to think about this, right? Nearly 2/3 of employees fear coming forward about a mental health issue because they think that this would negatively affect their opportunities for promotion. We could have some phenomenal employees that are struggling, that need support, need help, or need to be directed to where to get support and help, but they won't do it because they fear that this is going to affect their future at the company. And that's saddening, and that's what we want to break through. We want to be able to break through that and create a trusting and open and transparent environment for employees. So when it comes to stigmatization, we have to think about, the process of the fact that it starts off with labeling, where you say this person has a mental illness, or this is a person, if you're using wrong terminology, people refer to them as the mentally ill rather than see them as somebody who has mental illness. And then that creates a negative stereotype to say, well, they are weaker or they are unable to do things, right? So you're creating assumptions around those people. Then after that creates a division, the us and them. This is, we're healthy here and they're unhealthy. So it's an us and them that gets created in that stigmatization. And then of course, then comes discrimination. Well, we won't give that task or that job or that promotion to those individuals because of all the reasons and because they've been stigmatized. So we have to be constantly aware of that risk that we take when it comes to stigmatization, to avoid that at all costs when we're taking care of our team. So other things to consider, of course, is that right now, it's a reality that mental illness is everywhere, right? We've heard the numbers, we've heard the data, the statistics are appearing on the screen. You've heard them before, right? Most of us by the age of 40 would have had about 50% of the population would have experienced mental illness. So that's, you flip a coin by the time you're 40 and you or someone you love has experienced mental illness. And that's shocking information when we realize that, we're still so far back. I think it was Brent that mentioned this at the last presentation, is that where we were in the 90s when it comes to physical safety, we're there right now with mental safety, right? We're really behind, and we're really trying to catch up as a society on mental safety for everyone. So going into attitudes towards, physical and mental illness. And I think that's an important point that you'll see, is that at the end of the day, when we look at physical injury or illness, it's visible, it's often respected, and it's quite literally addressed most of the time. Well, if we consider that mental injury and illness is often invisible and dismissed and ignored, out of sight, out of mind, we've heard that before. And that's where it becomes dangerous. And that's why we have to change our perspective. We have to really start having an attitude towards physical health and mental health being one and the same. But here's a funny and sarcastic title from a comic I found here. It's called Helpful Advice. It's a sarcastic title for the record. So it's showing somebody saying something that they would normally say to somebody who has a mental illness, but they're saying it to somebody who has a physical illness. And you see this discrepancy and you see how ridiculous it sounds. So one of them, of course, is obviously has the food poisoning. So the gentleman says, I get that you have food poisoning and all, but you have to at least make an effort. And the other one, which probably my favorite is he's missing his hand and the person says, you just need to change your frame of mind and you'll feel better. And when you look at that, it sounds absolutely ridiculous when you're looking at physical health, but we do those things with mental health as well. So we have to change our perspective that if somebody has a mental illness, we have to treat it as the same that we have with physical, that we can see it, that we can perceive it, that we can support and help and medically treat the person. So shifting our perspective is really important. At the end of the day, mental illness is a commonplace, it's a human condition, it's neurological disorder, it's treatable as well. Mental health issues in the workplace can be handled the same way as as physical health concerns, right? So you have to understand it's not the employee's fault. You have to evaluate the conditions in regards to the employee's ability to perform their job at the end of the day. And if necessary, you have to offer accommodation that respect the employee's limitation. So later on, we'll talk about examples of different accommodations that you could consider as well. So really important why to prioritize mental health. And I think that point has been drilled into all of us throughout this Make It Safe conference. So just quickly skim through, but of course, all of this affects the person's ability to do their work, to stay out at the workplace, to be productive, to be healthy, to be cooperative, to influence the culture. All of those components are being taken care of. And then kind of the quadrants that we have to look at is how do we support the employees, because at the end of the day, they have lives, they have to go back to their kids, their family, and live their lives. So how do we support them, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all people. We all want to take care of ourselves, right? How do we create a supportive culture around the organization that people have expectation of what happens and how we deal with mental health? And minimize productivity loss and costs. So the financial repercussions that come, of course, from somebody who may be fully disabled from a mental illness. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things for us to consider is our duty to accommodate, right? We have a duty to accommodate as employers, and it's necessary for us to understand that, because at the end of the day, we have to be able to find ways to accommodate without undue hardship, but we have to find ways that we can support our employees and accommodate them. So there's a few things, of course, that you can do if you want to start the conversation. So one of the things that we often kind of see from our end is that some people shy away of having that conversation with their employees, right? As soon as they think, oh, there's a mental illness at hand, it's a mental health issue, they clam up. They don't want to talk. They don't want to have a conversation with anybody. But it's really important that you build trust throughout your relationships with the employees. And then with that trust, once you've built that, you're able to then start a conversation with the employee. So if you suspect that an employee within your organization is struggling with mental health issue, you have to consider how you would respond. So here's a little bit of the kind of the do's and don'ts when having those conversations, right? So you want to focus on the work performance, right? At the end of the day, you have to say what you're noticing in the work performance that's dipping, understanding that the person's performance used to be maybe better and has now dipped. Make light of that, bring attention to that, and focus on the work performance itself, right? Take the time really to listen to the employee, to pause and think, right? Don't bombard them with a bunch of questions and overwhelm them, right? Inform them of possible accommodations so that they know that there's support out there. A lot of employees we hear don't say anything or just assume they need to go off work because there is no accommodations that can be made, right? So have an open conversation that, look, we're going to look into this. You may not be able to know what accommodation in that moment, but at least say there are accommodations that we can look into. Remind them of the benefits that are available. We have a lot of great benefits. And if people aren't reminded that they have access to EAP, AFAP, mental health benefits, then of course, they won't be using them. So remind them that they exist and that are available and how to reach out. And of course, insist on meeting them again so that you can review that performance and you review the recovery process as well. And ensure to document everything objectively so that you have that information so you can follow up and measure progress and have the discussions with them. So things that you don't want to do, you don't want to ask or probe for a diagnosis. That's medical information. They're not share. Oh, I can hear myself now. There you go. So it's really important that you don't interrupt throughout, although I just got interrupted by a video, so that was timely. So don't interrupt, don't dismiss their thoughts and feelings, really take the time to listen. Don't accuse them of making things up or exaggerating, and don't really attempt to do personal anecdotes and throw in. Really, this is their time to have a conversation with you. So listen to what they have to say at that time. And then, of course, don't look to try to fix them or resolve all their problems, right? Mental illness can come from various different sources. And it's not for you to fix it, as I said at the beginning. You're there to provide support and direct them to where that support can be found, and be there to accommodate where possible when it comes to what their abilities are for the work they're doing. So some proactive moments, and then James is, biting at the teeth. He's going to be jumping in just a second. I want to give him enough time. But ensure your benefits package is up to date. Be mindful of the language you use, things like, mentally ill or addicts or things that you want to avoid. You want to talk about a person that is dealing with mental illness or dealing with an addiction. You want to be able to foster really an open and stigma-free environment, because a lot of it comes down under the prevention umbrella of removing that stigma at work for a trusting environment, so everybody feels open to share that information without feeling like there's repercussions or that their ability to get promoted or have specific tasks assigned to them be hindered, right? And then check in with employees, continually do that one-on-ones and having conversations with them to see how they're doing. And then one of the things you're already doing right now by participating to this event is educating yourself, but educate your peers. Bring this information out to the team, do webinars, workshops, have a conversation. Employees hear that, see that, it affects the culture, and again, brings an openness for everyone to have a conversation about mental illness and mental health. So when it comes to mental health, bullying, harassment claims, WorkSafe BC, a lot of people have tons of questions. So this is the part where I'm going to let James and his expertise speak to that point. So James, I'll give you control here. Go ahead. James, you're going to unmute yourself. Perfect. You're controlling my screen at the same time. Technical difficulty. We'll be right back.
There we go. Sorry, guys. I had to unmute myself before I requested control.
There you go.
All right. So thank you so much for logging in today and listening to us. Mental health and bullying and harassment claims. It's nothing to be scared of in the workplace. And I know the process is definitely something that's developing over time. If we look back to 2016, when we sort of started seeing the influx coming in, they had about 2,500 mental health or bullying and harassment claims at WorkSafe BC. And so far this year, this is something the Employers Forum would be aware of this, we're on track to crest over 9,000 claims this year. So it's something that can no longer be ignored. It's something that we do have to address and we have to be proactive about. So the questions are often like, what do we do first? And how can we defend ourselves? And by defending it, it means just being proactive, making sure you have great systems in place, great employee supports up front. And then from there, like, what are the next steps in treating it just like any regular injury, and how you mitigate or defend against. Now, when it comes to workers' compensation, we know that WCB does provide mental health benefits for people that have suffered a mental illness or muscle injury at work. But the big thing is not all qualify. And it's important to delineate between what actually is a qualifying injury and what is not. So when we look at it, to be qualified for an injury under mental health, first thing, it has to have happened at work. There's a sentence that is taught to you when you work for WorkSafe. Something has to have occurred in the course of employment, and it has to be arising out of employment, which means you have to be underpaid time and you have to be completing something for the employer's benefit, and there has to be a hazard that came out of the employment relationship that triggered the injury. What I want to make important to note is there is no difference between a physical injury and a mental health injury. We treat them the same and we do the same due diligence when we're investigating claims. Now, when it comes to mental health injuries, there can be one traumatic stressor, which is a cause of mental injury, or it could be a series of smaller stressors over time that amalgamate to something that's called a deemed stressor. That's the first step for qualification. Once we've deemed that this exists and there's a significant stressor, from there, a worker would then be referred for a psychological assessment, and they have to have a diagnosis from a registered psychologist or a registered psychiatrist, not a counselor or anyone else or a doctor. It has to be that for it to qualify as an injury. They wouldn't proceed into the assessment step until the adjudicator that's making the decision has deemed that there was a significant stressor at work. Now, what qualifies for benefits, what does not? There's a couple things here to understand. If a claim is caused because of a change in work conditions or assigned work in relation to discipline, termination, workload, deadlines, evaluation, or performance management, or even transfer, layoff, demotion, reorganization, those are not things under the Act that actually qualify as a mental health injury. Those are excluded, as it's important that employers are able to actually run their book of business and manage their business and their staff at how they have to achieve profitability and sustainability. Now, when we look at it, if WorkSafe or WCB, depending on the province, accepts a claim, the duration and the benefits that a worker receives will be dependent upon the psychological evidence and the nature of the issue. What we have to understand is, what was a significant stressor? So when we talk about being proactive, it's like that initial investigation. What are your procedures? What do you have in place? What have you done to be prepared for this to start? Now, the benefits they can receive, there's return to work support. They'll be seeing counseling, they'll see a psychologist, and they'll get return to work support services, which will help them transition back in. Obviously, there's compensation for lost wages. There's the doctors are covered, mental health programs, and any prescription drugs. Now, what to expect when you see this, depending upon the type of claim, you may not see anything in the portal whatsoever, or you may not receive any documentation depending on the province. Others you may. What you'll know is you'll be notified the claim has been accepted, and you'll understand whether it's healthcare or if it's healthcare and wage loss. Beyond that, you're not going to see much else, but the job that we now have as employers and managers and supervisors is to figure out a way to make that worker feel safe and supported in returning to the workplace. So when we look at it, from a mental health side, it can be a mental health injury, such as a traumatic event, or it can be something that stems from bullying and harassment. Now, for bullying and harassment, the wording is quite clear. It's when someone takes an action that they knew or reasonably ought to know would have caused the worker to be humiliated or intimidated. Now, again, that's something in the workplace that can occur once and be severe, or it can occur over time. Now, examples are there's bullying and harassment, verbal aggression, insults, calling some derogatory names, harmful hazing, initiation, vandalizing workers' possessions. Now, outside of this one, WCB does look at common vernacular of an industry and takes that in consideration when looking at some of the commentary or the verbal discourse that occurs. The biggest thing to understand is interpersonal relationships in the workplace is also something that is taken into consideration and may not be compensable for an injury. It was just an interpersonal issue. Work has to be the hazard, or the hazard has to be arising out of work for it to occur. Now, responding to bullying and harassment, what's important that is if a worker's witnessed or experiencing it, they have to report it to you just like they would report any other injury. Now, as employers, we are now responsible to address the incident. If we refuse to address the incident, then the worker does have the right to call prevention, which would then result in an investigation by a prevention officer. The biggest thing we need to understand about this is we have to have procedures in place beforehand, things that are set up in advance. When we do receive a report, every manager is trained and every manager is aware of the process to occur. Now, the procedures must be reasonable, and they must ensure a reasonable response to the incident and address it in full to mitigate the hazard that was there. Now, the hazard in this scenario would be the cause of the stressor. Now, that could be the worker itself, then the interpersonal relationship. It could be a work site. The biggest thing to start with is when we're looking at this is how and when our investigation is going to be conducted. What have you set up in advance so when this occurs, you know how to drill down right away, just like you would with any other physical injury. When you have an employer incident report that you have to submit, same as a physical injury, you want to have a similar background when approaching it from a mental health side. You want to include what you're going to be investigating, the roles and responsibilities of the employers, the supervisors, the workers, and others. And then you want to have a follow-up investigation where you look at descriptive actions, the time frame and how you're dealing with this one. And the biggest thing is quality record keeping. You want to document everything in an objective manner. You just want to state the facts, and you want to look at it and walk through to figure out exactly what was the root cause. Was it an employment connection? Did it stem from discipline or workload assignment, or was it actually a series of stresses or a significant stressor? And from there, you can deem how you're going to deal with it going forward. Now, again, you're responsible for ensuring these procedures are followed, and workers are expected to collaborate and cooperate with any investigation within the workplace. Now, when we further define it, we can look at bullying and harassment as we talked about, verbal aggression or yelling, humiliating processes, malicious rumors, or derogatory names. Now, it does not include expressing a difference of opinion. People have opinions on multiple things in life, from business to religion to politics. Discussions of that and a disagreement along that lines is not bullying and harassment. That's an interpersonal conflict. Now, constructive feedback or guidance. I have seen mental health claims filed along this one because somebody received feedback or guidance on their work and their productivity. That does not, so long as it's not done with a harmful or malicious intent, it does not qualify under the Act. So the language here matters. So how we approach our workers and our employees when we're providing feedback is something we need to consider, and it's procedures we need to have in place. So reasonable action taken by an employer or supervisor in relation to the management and direction or the place of employment is not something that qualifies. So if you change a worker's location, if you change the station that they're on, that it doesn't qualify. So I'm seeing a couple questions pop up. I will address them here shortly. It's something that's important that we understand the foundations of it. So now when we get into successful disability management, this is where we're going to transition back slightly to Martin. But before that, the questions that we have, I'm just going to touch on the two that I saw pop up. So we have one where, how does WCB coverage compare, overlap, or fill in the gaps with workplace LTD programs? Well, if it's a workplace injury, that's compensational, meaning that work was the cause of it, short-term disability and long-term disability don't apply. It's purely a work-safe injury. So if there was a significant or traumatic stressor or a series of stressors that arise out of the employment connection, you have to file a work-safe claim. It's a statute bar. So LTD will refuse a claim if they find out that that's the case. So it is a work-safe claim. And then again, for reporting procedures where bullying and harassment are occurring with the top level, you want to make sure you keep an eye on this. There's a number of larger employers that we work with where I've gone in and done education on this. And it's something that you have to have that reporting structure in place, and everyone has to be aware of it. Because if you're audited or if there is a prevention visit, you want to be able to show quite clearly what steps you've taken and your reporting chain and the investigation process you've done. And the biggest thing I can say is being proactive up at the front. We can't be scared or shy away from investigating these injuries just like we would a physical injury. It's something that is on the rise. And since 2016, it's more than quadrupled in our, well, it's coming to a quadrupling in claims that are being registered. And this is an entity that's only going to grow as claims go on in their duration. So I hope that answered those two. So thank you for that. But the successful foundations of disability management, as we transition back to Martin, obviously there's prevention. We're trying to look at mitigating claims costs through preventative measures up front, not on the back end where we're chasing things after the fact, trying to appeal or argue or protest. If we have quality procedures and quality care up front, that's a natural occurrence that happens. Now, again, thorough policy is a necessity. You do have to have this documented and logged. It is something that you want to have records there. You want to share with the workers and the employees. You want to talk about it at your safety meetings, your monthly town halls, so that they're aware of it. It's one thing to have a policy that a worker signs upon hiring. The second thing we need to look at, or what WCB will look at, is how often did we talk about it after the fact? So if you had a policy they signed 3 years ago, but you've never discussed it since, they find it reasonable that a worker may not have been aware. So if you talk about it at least once a year, and I generally recommend once every 6 months, just to make sure that new hires, current hires are consistently made aware of the program, it's a positive benefit for you. And a proactive response to the risk, understanding if anyone reports an inappropriate behavior or feeling that they're being degraded or harassed in the workplace, it's something you want to take quite seriously, and you don't want to shuffle under the rugs, because once the claims are in, it's extremely challenging on the management side. So again, at ability management, I'm going to pass it back to Martin because he has his wonderful finish up there for you guys. And you have control. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James. No, they're very informative. And just I want to invite everybody to keep asking questions because we got James on the call and he's wonderful at answering those questions. If we don't have time to answer your question, of course, you can follow up with us. You can email us at info@textmed.com and we'll pass that on to James and the team here. And we can go ahead and reach out to you, give you a call or set up a meeting with you and your team if you need any support or help. So just want to make sure that you guys know that if we don't have time to go through all the questions, we can do so after the fact. So essentially, the big foundation pieces, as James was saying, starts off with prevention, right? And this applies for both physical and mental injuries, right? And at the end of the day, we said it's kind of the same. You got to treat them the same in a lot of respects. There's some sensitivity around mental injury, of course, or mental illness, but having the ability management component be part of it is really crucial. Really, at the end of the day, having the ability to offer modified duties in those situations or a commitment to accommodations so that the individual knows that accommodations can be made. And we'll be talking about that at the next slide. There's the claim management component. If it comes to appeals and protests and cost relief, exactly like what James was saying, if it doesn't apply, if it is not supposed to be an accepted claim, then we have to have the proper steps in place so it doesn't get accepted, and then it will get funneled appropriately if it does fall under a different category like short-term disability or LTD. And then, of course, the last but very important piece is the health management, right? The quicker care equals faster recovery, which equals shorter claim. Our president often says here is that we look to medically fix the problem, because at the end of the day, if we medically fix the problem, there is no claim. There's a happy, healthy, productive employee returning to work and returning to their life as well. So that's really crucial and important. So we have to look at ways to support that medical recovery, point employees to the right care, if it is mental health or physical health. So just talking about building a plan around accommodations and building an accommodation plan itself. So a few quick steps that you can do when it comes to accommodations is recognize the need for the accommodation in the first place, gather and assess the needs and the information as it pertains to the need for that accommodation. And then you need to create a specific accommodation plan for that employee. So it has to be specific to their needs. And then most importantly, of course, when you implement it, monitor it and track it and make sure that you're seeing that progress, that how the person's performance is being affected, you're seeing recovery, you're seeing the person improve as well. And it's clear and expectations are clear with the employee. So I'm going to show you a few examples of common combinations. Of course, it's always good to be creative and think outside the box, but really these are some of the examples. So for example, you can use examples like 6 times in that sentence. Schedule flexibility. So you want to look at opportunities for somebody to work either different hours or different times. We deal with PTSD for robberies and other types of scenarios. If the person is working a night shift and that's when the robbery happened, could be an opportunity for them to work a different during the day instead. And the same thing with different approach to supervision. If somebody, the supervisor, the person they're working with, or the approach that's being used for their supervision needs to change because it's affecting negatively the employee, look at that as an opportunity for accommodation. Tailored training is important. Modified job duties, as we said, and the same thing is James was mentioning that point is we can look at alternate workplace or location. So if it means that somebody can be actually removed from where the stressor is, if it's PTSD, for example, where the traumatic event happened at a specific location or time, then they can be removed and working at a different location. And look at different technological tools and devices and things that they can use as well. So those are all examples, general examples, of course, of accommodations, but be specific when you're making an accommodation plan. The next piece, of course, to help you is the return to work process. So a lot of you may be familiar already with it. There's companies like ourselves that help organizations across Canada when they need that extra support, but just to break it down similarly to the actual aspect of accommodation, but a little more specific to the return to work. So we really want to establish expectations. And this is the important piece, is at the very beginning, if somebody needs to leave work and you recognize that from a mental illness or mental injury, so at that point, this is where you want to expect to say, look, this is the expectation of what the leave would look like to get us started, but I'm going to reach out to you. I'm going to be in contact with you. I'm going to have conversations with you, and I'm going to follow up to see how you're doing. And employees that are suffering and going through mental illness, they need that. They want that. Too many employers just stop talking and they scare, oh, if I call him or I call her or I call them, and it'll stress them. It'll add stress to their lives. It won't. It's very important that you stay in touch with them to see how they're doing. Not when are you coming back to work, but more, how are you doing? How are you progressing? What else? What other support do we have in place to help you? You want to stay in contact with the employee throughout that process as well, like I mentioned. And you want to really gather the necessary information when you're assessing the needs for a return to work. So some of your responsibilities to consider as an employer really comes down to informing the employee about the return to work options. Like I said before, many employees don't even know that's an option. They think it's either working exactly my job, exactly my hours, exactly where I work, to not working. There's no in between, but there very much is modified duties and accommodations available, and remain in regular contact with them, identify possible accommodation, analyze the demands for their role, and ensure that they return to work safely, of course. And it's a safe return to work and it's a safe environment for them to return. So these are all your employer responsibilities. The employee has a responsibility as well to follow that treatment that they are on, to update the employer on how they're doing and progressing, any change in their abilities and limitations. And of course, really provide doctor information. Again, not diagnosis, but what they need from an accommodation standpoint. It is your right as an employer to ask for understanding the abilities and the restrictions of individuals. So don't be afraid to ask that. And of course, as we go on for the process, you want to create a specific return to work plan or a graduated return to work plan. You want to implement and again, monitor that return to work plan, which is really important. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. I know we've got a lot of information that we shared with you, but the fact that you're here is really important, because at the end of the day, if you're able to make a difference in one person's life, that has ripple effects. It really does. And we want to be able to make sure that everybody gets the help that they need and the support, because that employee that you're supporting might be the next person to grow and double your business one day. So we got a few minutes now to take on questions. James, are you seeing questions come in?
I am, yeah. There's a couple here. So one asked about the deadline for filing. So whether it's a physical injury or a mental injury, the deadline within the province of British Columbia is the same. It's 1 year. The biggest thing is there has to be continuity in the medical to show a clear temporal relationship to the work relationship. That means that there has to be successive and consistent treatment over that period of the year. If there's gaps in the medical or gaps in treatment, it then becomes harder to prove a temporal relationship to the workplace. So workers that do wait do risk that benefit. Generally speaking, anything over 4 weeks is considered a delay, and over 3 months, it gets challenging to kind of provide support for that relationship. And then again, the other one was interesting. So if the doctor's overriding your offer of light duty, was a question for me to sort of summarize it. You're, as an employer, under the Workers' Compensation Act, you have the right to offer suitable alternative modified or light duties. Now, it is the board's responsibility to actually determine whether those light duties offered mitigate the total temporary disability or the total partial disability, whether it's a physical or mental health industry, independent upon the doctor's comments. The board has a new pilot program where they're actually having the board medical advisors reach out to family physicians to discuss the light duties and come to a reasonable agreement. So that is something else you can actually request. When you understand how to navigate the system, there's a lot of opportunities for it. So I would encourage every employer, continue offering the light duties, offer them on the day of injury with a stay at work program, offer it in writing, receive verbal acceptance or refusal. These are all things on the proactive side that helps to mitigate your longer term durations and claims costs. Oh, there's 4 more questions.
All right, so while you read the questions real quick, James, I'm going to just step in here, and I just want to share one more thing as well. If ever you're looking to track and understand how you're performing as an employer from a psychological safety standpoint, I want to recommend to everybody Guarding Minds at Work. It's a great tool. If you need support, we can certainly support you in implementing this and doing a survey. But essentially, it's a free survey that you can send anonymous to all your employees and understand the 13 different psychosocial factors that come into play when it comes to safety in the workplace. So I highly encourage, if everybody wants to know a little bit more about that to look into Guarding Minds at Work or reach out to us, and we'll help you as well. So Dale and Shirley, I think we're just running out of time. We've got more questions. We'll try to answer them in the chat if we can, or follow up.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Martin. We are at a time and we do have some sessions that are starting right now. So I'm just going to have to pull the pin. We won't be able to continue this too much longer, but great presentation. The second time I've seen you now, Martin. Both of you have done a fantastic job. So thank you again for joining us today. For everyone who's still watching, please take a moment to check out our exhibit hall if you haven't. And we have a lot of other great sessions today, but please join us at 11 a.m. for our keynote, Leading in a Worker Shortage. So enjoy the rest of the conference and thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.